Hi, this is Lynn Schnebley with Educating with Wisdom, and today we're looking at the issue of racism in the United States, an African American globalist occultist Vatican problem. Okay, thank you so much. And I'm Educating with Wisdom, the ambassador for heaven's creating and protecting goddesses and archangels over life. Now, those of you who know anything about me, and my site is barely followed because I'm like, I'm the last person the government ever wants to see, and the globalists never want anybody to know what's going on. Anyway, to know what's going on. To make a long story short, if we were to take a look at the history of slavery into the United States, I think it's important to start with the fact that Americans did not bring them in. England did, France did, Spain did. The United States proper got up between 4 and 6% of the slaves from West Africa. I'm not saying this was right. These were decisions that were made at a time when the business agreement was with the Africans themselves. And you're going to say, oh no, they were coerced into it. No, they weren't. I mean, there were a few that were, but generally speaking, the Portuguese took the most. I mean, they took 40%. Why aren't you crushing the Portuguese? You should be crushing them. They took almost 40%, more than anybody else. They showed up, I guess it was in the area around Angola, wanted to strike up business deals, also looked at, and this was as we were getting rid of the Moors who had imprisoned and enslaved Europe's. All right, and the Berbers who were running slave trades all over the place, getting white women and white men. Okay, we're not looking at innocence here. East Africa, so if you look at Kenya, Ethiopia, all that region around there and going down, that's Islamic. We did not take them into slaves. We didn't do it. This pull, that pull, was more Islam and people going into that area. Europe took it from West Africa. Why are we taking responsibility for East Africa? Why are we taking responsibility for Kenya or any of these places? Okay, that may be an English problem, and I guess I understand the English didn't even become really prominent in Kenya until the 1940s, 1950s, and by then, very quickly, they were soon no longer prominent. So I'm not sure what the big to-do is about Kenya, other than it's Barack Obama and it's Kenya, all right, because they like to be in the middle of everything. And I'm not sure what the big to-do is about Ethiopia, because we sided or we didn't do something when Italy invaded, trying to take over the Ethiopian, which was not right. I will agree with you, it's not right, and I think your government would probably do a better job than the Italian government. But these things happen in war. We're still not responsible for the Sudan. We're not responsible for Somalia. If we take a look at the population of Africa, around 1900, there were 120 million people, and full of clitorectomies and genital mutilations and the African enslavement of each other and constantly at war, constantly. And polygamy, and in order to have that kind of polygamy, you got to kill your sons or kill somebody else's sons, because Islam did the same thing. You have to do that. That's not Western women's problems. It's certainly not my problem. That's your problem. And between that point and this point, because we found out things about bacteria and water and malaria, and we did things about mosquitoes and all that other kind of stuff, you've gone from 120 million people to almost 1.5 billion because, excuse me, nobody cared about you? Are you kidding? Africa has done, African Americans have the highest standard of living, I understand, of all Africans in the world. Excuse me, and you have more education. And the women have their clitorises. I'm not trying to be gross, but it's true. And Western women are the ones that are out there fighting for African women. Yeah, you need to be told off royally. We got in the United States between 4 and 6% of the population. That was a business deal. The British started it. Didn't happen with us. Everybody had indentured slaves, and the first person who sued for lifetime slavery of an African person, indentured person, just like a white person was indentured. I have it up there. Okay, I have the whole thing, was the Castor case, and it was an African Angola man who enslaved for a lifetime another African man. He went to court twice to prove that that human being was his slave. Up until that point of time, Africans who came over were enslaved just like white people were enslaved, and we had mostly white enslaved people. It was the Africans themselves that did it to each other. It was the Africans themselves in West Africa, and I don't know if it happened in Eastern Africa because of how Islam worked, but in Western Africa, not only did they want to trade for products with Europe and did they want to use human beings, but when they went to war and took other farmers' lands and other people's lands, they got their women, they got their land. Mostly men came into the Americas for a long time, so that freed up all those women so that the men along the western coast of Africa could have more concubines and more pretty women and all those other things going on. Yes, that's what happened. Grow up, folks. I'm going to go in and take a look at some notes. Oh, hold on. The problem is driven by men. Africans and African Americans are 50% of the problem. Let me repeat that again. African and African Americans today, not initially, but today, they are 50% of the problems. Globalist, which include business, techno, Vatican, Freemason, and other occult groups. 40% gay men, transgender men to women. 10% is actually maybe is a U.S. white problem. We have everyone else attacking us for the problems that some of it spews off onto you. But we have other minorities as well. Now, from the percentage of these other men with all their problems, how will they look after the population and get more women as sex slaves and disenfranchised wives? All right. I already handled this part about population. Oh, excuse me. Without slavery, you wouldn't know anything. You would know about malaria. You wouldn't know about anything. Nothing. Honestly, nothing. Okay, you weren't going anywhere with this. And I understand that malaria and all those other things affect intelligence. Sickle cell anemia affects it. All these things affect it. But you know what? The big driver is polygamy, war, genital mutilation destroys women and affects intelligence of an entire community. You're the problem. No, you're just the problem. You are the problem. You're the problem. You are the problem, and you are the problem. Here's something also about the Christian faith and the Christian men that all want to be part of the brotherhood, especially the very gay Vatican Catholic Church, don't want you to know this. In Christianity, if you read the Gospels, I'm not talking about the Old Testament, I'm talking about if you read the Gospels, because the Old Testament, if you were taken as a slave, women became your sex slaves, like Islam. If you're a man, if you circumcise them and if they get to be good after so many years, if they've done a good job, they're part of your community, and there you go. But the women are always your sex slaves. That's how it works. Now, in Christianity, you could have an indentured slave if somebody fell into debt, if somebody couldn't look after themselves and they needed to come under somebody's wings. They might be a servant, a lifetime servant, debt, sex slaves. It's hard to bring criminals in because you don't want to bring them into your lives. You might treat them as support, or you might have a colony of people that are quote unquote imprisoned and you have them working. But it had to always be done humanely. Within the Noahide, you had to understand that even though these people had done something wrong, if they came within your domain and if they were willing to work within that system, that they were entitled and to be seen as children of God, even though they were enslaved. And that's true. So, but you couldn't, under the Noahide, you couldn't steal people's lives. You couldn't take people's things. You couldn't push them into poverty. You couldn't go out and murder. And the other big thing that, which really impacted what came over here, because we never should have taken these people. Their lives had been stolen. We should not have engaged in this at all. It was part of the times. In retrospect, it was a huge mistake. The other problem is that it's just not a good fit. The races aren't fitting. It doesn't mean that we can't respect the race. It just means it doesn't fit. And after all these years, just as we have to understand that African Americans have, on average, not totally on average, but on average a bit more testosterone per the population, the percentage, but also more muscle mass, different things like that. And we know that the Chinese and the Orientals have the least amount. We also know that the cranial volume is different between the races. And we haven't been allowed to do enough studies to see how that works with testing. All we know is that we are not able to make up this difference. There are a few other aspects that go with slavery, and Islam in Africa and men in general are falling down with this all over. In terms of sexual sin, you are not allowed to commit adultery. You're not allowed to commit fornication. They meant fornication. They weren't kidding. Jesus and St. Paul and in Revelations, they mean fornication. You're not allowed to have sex with someone else outside of marriage. They meant fornication. They meant one man, one woman. You're not allowed to have concubines. You're not allowed to have polygamy. When our men brought women in from abroad, and when they had sex with these women, they were not Christian. So the men who brought these women in and had sex with them, or who bred them and who bred the other men, were not Christian people. So this country is not built upon Christianity. The kinds of things that Benjamin Franklin comes out with, the kinds of things that Jefferson comes out with, these are not Christian men. You know, they just weren't. It's ridiculous to think that we were based on the Enlightenment period, the Enlightenment men, and everything that's come forward, everything, Freemasonry, the Enlightenment, everything has nothing to do with Jesus. So get that out of your heads. It isn't. Again, and we need to think about that, because we need to think about what we're going to do with the prison system going forward, what we're going to do about people that fall on hard times, who can't get their act together, that constantly go into debt because they mishandle things. They shouldn't be allowed to keep being bailed out. At some point, they should become indentured, but they still have to act right, because you don't want to be supporting what's going on right now. And you don't want to be supporting single parenthood, and you don't want to be supporting pornography. Pornography, by the way, is a sound shift from fornication. Porn. It's prostitution. It's a no-no, and it's not allowed. Now, the Christian church is not coming down on that form of slavery, and most of the women engaged in pornography are abused. And the children are abused. Some of the young men are abused too, but most of the women are abused. All right? Pornography is prostitution. Porn is prostitution in Greek. Prostitution is not allowed. Visual prostitution, all of these other things, this is sexual assault. It is imprisonment. It's not allowed. This is slavery, gentlemen. You're not allowed to do this. You're not going to heaven. This is slavery. There's no way around it. You're not going to win with this one. This is the Noahide. I'm letting the Jews know. I'm letting the Muslims know. You're not winning with this one. You will never win with this one. If you follow the laws of cause and effect, you're clearly in the wrong. You're not winning. Now, let's go in and take a look at and it's slavery. And what African Americans did to the women's rights movement, what Dr. Martin Luther did when he interviewed with Playboy, and Playboy was pushing abortion and then went right out and decimated the women's rights movement, completely changed everything. I have the video online. Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, they have continued to imprison women. They have held up transgender men. These men are evil, wicked people, and the thought that they're going to be the aborted children that their Black American women are aborting because they supported the whole porno grotesque system does not, I think it's justice. It's karma. So think about what you're doing. You are the problem. Again, the U.S. got approximately 6% of the Western American and almost nothing from the East. That was Islam. What did African colonies do when they got freedom? Did they build relationships with Africa? That should be this. Did they ask to go back? This is an important point. You're freed. The United States in the early part of the 1800s to the mid-1800s negotiated parcels of property in Africa and Liberia, I believe is part of it, to allow freed Africans in the North, to allow free Africans to go back there. The Liberians have not done a good job. All right? Haiti got its freedom from France, burnt all of its bridges, but got its freedoms from France. Excuse me. At that point, did the Haitians go back to the Africans and say, hey, look, we'd like to have a relationship with you. We'd like to be able to transport goods and services back and forth, and maybe we could hook something up so that we can begin trading with parts of the southern parts of the United States. Did they do that? No, they did not. How about Jamaica and all these areas along here? Did they say, hey man, now that we're free in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, now that we're free, we're going to go build our trade routines. We're going to do it over there in Africa, and we're not really going to be looking at, looking after the British and looking after the tourism and stuff like that, because, hey man, we're going to have our trade there, and then we're going to be our products here, and this is going to be a trade-free zone, and then Americans can come over here and get African products. Did they do that? No, they did not do that. So, hey man, who's the problem? You are the problem. Yeah, you're the problem. You are. And to have a group of Africans, or Barack Obama, who's Kenyan, and I think, pretty sure when he became Barry Sotoda, or whatever his name, Barry Sirota, whatever that name was, he lost his American citizenship. That's why the Boeing plane went down. The Lion from Indonesia went down when I asked for, anyway. He not a U.S. citizen. Not because he was, even if he was born in Kenya, he should not have been a U.S. citizen, but even if he was born there, an argument could be made for it. But in order for him to be adopted by his stepfather over there, and for him to do what he did, he had to be adopted. He had to lose his American citizenship. And according to what I understand, he did not reclaim it. So how did we get somebody who's half white, half black, who may not even be an American citizen, whose children are clearly related to his friends and not him? How did he get to be president of the United States? And I'm not even beginning to look at the Bushes, because I already know about the Bushes. And so when we look at the African American problem, you could have put somebody different into the you had a globalist Muslim. We had other African Americans, folks. We really did. You didn't need a half white, half black one, just like Meghan Markle didn't have to have Barack Obama's birthday and be half white, half black too. We did not need to do that. And she had a false pregnancy just like Mrs. Obama had a false pregnancy. Is that Mrs. Obama? Because some people say it isn't. I don't know. I don't have enough. But clearly the children are related to their friends. Yeah. So, no, you did not do what you should have done. You like to sit around and bitch and complain. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what you do. That's all you do. Two, when I have whistleblown mostly to support African American kids. I have African American teachers who lie about what they're doing, and white teachers who lie, but especially African American teachers who have lied. I found the Jamaican teachers to be far more professional. I did, and they don't understand what's going on in this country because they can't imagine kids acting like this. Um, I can't make excuses for you. I know that there are many, many years of what you feel, rightly so, have been discrimination. Again, this is a system that didn't work. Again, we should have helped you reintegrate back into Africa when we knew it wasn't going to work. Um, I don't know what to do with it at this point. I do know that we need to move forward, and if we can't get this done right, we cannot destroy the world because we can't get along. We have to have a divorce. If we cannot get along, we have to come up with some kind of settlement that allows you to have either a part of the United States or help you reintegrate back to Africa, because we cannot continue. We're not looking after what needs to happen. And we shouldn't have to just marry each other. Just because Playboy meant we had to have sex with each other on their covers, or pornography makes it possible, doesn't mean that it's working well all the time. Goodness knows it may or it may not. I don't know. I don't know. But after 300 years of going through this, it doesn't work. And Canada needs to keep its mouth shut because it's like 85% white and it can't take care of its Native Americans. There's nothing right about Canada. There's nothing right about Europe. You need to keep your mouth shut. And I mean that. And as for the Vatican, they have sex with each other. It doesn't matter. So they think everybody should be able to have sex with each other. Yeah. That's how the Vatican rolls. And I'm not saying this is good or bad. You know, when you go to Africa, you're saying, how can she be so racist? The Africans don't want white people all showing up there. They don't want Asians all showing up there. The Asians don't want all white people showing up there, and they don't want Africans all showing up there. So why is it all these people can show up there? Now, here's the other thing, which is extremely selfish, and it's unnerving with African Americans and with Obama and with the globalist and all these other things. Okay? Part of the thing that kept us from not working well were the globalists. After the Civil War, and we kind of won. We were so in depth. There were so many problems with the banking system. Lincoln said, "I've got two problems. I have what's the war, and then I have the bankers. All right, the international bankers." And really, the British were planning on picking us up, and always were. And then the French were going to take over Mexico. If Mexicans hadn't lost their war with the French would have had Mexico, and they would have divvied up part of the United States, and then the British were going to take another part, and that's it. When we won, we weren't supposed to win, okay? As soon as it looked like there was a ceasefire and we were winning, Abraham Lincoln was killed, and he had ties to the Freemasons that had ties to the Jewish group that had ties to the British Freemasons. Well, I'm just going to let you know something, African Americans, that and the Canadians. Had Lincoln not died, and had he been able to forge and go forward, if we had not been thrown into this and we didn't have the Reconstruction program that occurred, which brought about so much of this hardship and the bad feelings, which Woodrow Wilson warned them about because of the Versailles Treaty. He saw the writing. He refused to sign it. Anyway, Canada would have unified with the United States. I mean, Canada was going to unify. They would have joined us. Once we took care of that barrier of slavery, they would have probably joined us. I mean, the British had to make sure that Lincoln was dead. Europe, the bankers, had to make sure that Europe was dead. They were not going to lose the Americas because God knows they needed to send all of their poor here and they needed to bleed us out. That needed to happen. This is a word of warning that I have for the Africans. Where we go from now, we're not going to continue like this because Elon Musk is, and the powers that be are looking at destroying you and destroying me and destroying everybody. All right. And you know what? The rest of the world seems to know something about it, and we're just the playing field because Hollywood is about Apollo, and Apollo is about the devil, and the Vatican has Apollo running their government. Seriously, they do. So, if we take a look at what's going on, and this is what I have to say to my African American colleagues. Africa is saying that it needs to have leadership and it needs to have expertise going in. I really don't want to send my African American women over to Africa. There would need to be an area carved out that would be completely safe for you, that people would be going into, because I'm not willing to have that go on there for you. But there is no reason why we couldn't negotiate your land. I mean, at this point, the world does not need to give Africa a dime. We don't need to give the Vatican a dime. I have a better idea. Let's hold the Vatican hostage and the Freemasons hostage and all of those brotherhoods hostage. Don't give them a dime. Do not give the Catholic Church or Rome a dime. Make sure that that money is established in a new church that has a belief system that has nothing to do with the support of gay men and the imprisonment of women, because that's what they do. They support men who imprison women, and they're not competition for these men. There you go. So, but they take your sons and they take your children, and it's, not good. So why don't we say we're not going to give them anything? When the United States defaults, it's not going to pay anybody anything. It won't send money anywhere. It won't send food anywhere. It's not going to send anything anywhere. And I think we're getting to that point. So at this point, you're looking at a global catastrophe in which Africa will starve. You better do a better job. And I think it's time we begin bankrupting these other institutions. It's time to bankrupt the Vatican. It is time to bankrupt the Freemasons. It's time to bankrupt Israel. I've just read that part in Revelations. They tell you. They warn you. And I'm not looking at Judah. I'm looking at the Ammonites, Moabites, this whole group. I'm not looking at Judah. I'm not looking at Israel. The Palestinians and the Samaritans are saying, look, how can they be running the porn industry? How can they be treating women the way they do, but have all these open agreements for the LGBTQ? I'm not looking at Judah. You're not Judah. You're not. You're the Ammonites and the Moabites. So I would ask my African American colleagues and African Americans, let's bankrupt everybody else instead of ourselves. Let's withhold things to the rest of the world. Let's not support them. And it's not the Chinese that started that virus. It's those crazy men and the crazy globalists like Eon. My African American people know about Revelations, and many of them know about the Bible. And so they know about how the heavens are at war, and our heavens are at war. And Elon Musk wants to put up to 42,000 satellites. Even 3,000 satellites can shut down a country completely and fry you. It's just like Revelations, folks. And they don't want you to know this. And you know what? Neither does the Vatican and all those brotherhood groups. Neither does Hollywood or the media. I don't hate African Americans. I just hate that they're caught up in this. And so, with this in mind, I think I'm going to go out and reach out to the Chinese communities and the Indian communities and the actual African American communities. And I think it's time we bankrupt the rest of you. There you go. Good night. I forgot to add one part. Here we go. And this is true. Globalists have used racial division to stoke globalists, and they caused the problems in the U.S. And I went into that. Was there anything else I needed to say? No. It's amazing. I already said good night. It's amazing. I have to represent Elizabeth I. Believe me, Elizabeth I would not have done this. No. And knowing what I know, holy smokes. No wonder why the Vatican wanted her dead. If she ever caught on to what the actual Hebrew text was, they were done. And she was the virgin. I mean, this is amazing. I came back. My birthday's December the 12th. That's for the Guadalupe. And I pick up the Church of Ephesus. You better believe when you see what I have online and those people that went after me, the church, I went to the church for years. They never helped, never lifted a finger. They never wanted what was, holy smokes. What I know, they never wanted. They never wanted somebody to go in and really look at that text in Hebrew. Yeah, they wanted her dead. Absolutely.